to treat schizophrenia patients. So especially treatment-resistant schizophrenia patients. I don't know how much you know about schizophrenia, but to give you a brief, there's around 3 million schizophrenia patients in the U.S. So it's a fairly common mental disorder, and the really big problem is that around 1/3 are treatment resistant. That means that they're hearing, a lot of them are hearing evil voices in their mind, and basically they cannot be treated. The medication, super tough medication, has been given, but it's not making the voices go away. And so we have this new treatment that was originally developed in the UK that we are then bringing to VR, where in our software you can create an avatar to represent the voice that you're hearing, and then we can transform the therapist's voice so it sounds in real time like the voice that the patient is hearing. And then they can put on a VR headset and sit across the table from a voice that they have in their head, and the therapist can control what the voice would say, and they can have a conversation. And it's a little bit like taking something that's in your head and maybe intangible, and making it like very tangible as an avatar. And then over these 9 sessions of therapy, we see tremendous results. So we're doing the world's biggest VR avatar trial with 266 patients in Denmark. We have trials in Australia, South Africa, and the US, and Spain, Poland, Germany.
I met a Rick!
Welcome back to another episode of Meta Rick, where we talk about XR technologies with business leaders, founders of creative agencies, all sorts of technologists and creatives that are kind of moving us towards this 3D immersive internet. Today we have Simon Lajboschitz with us. He's the co-founder of Khora virtual reality. I feel like everywhere I look, these numbers change because you guys just work on so many projects. So I read the other day that it was 300 XR projects and 1,200 workshops. And then I read that it was 400 and 1,500. And I think the next time it was like 500 and 1,800 or something like that. So the long story short, these guys run an insane amount of VR, AR, 360 production projects for brands, for nonprofits, for a variety of different clients. And you guys have been in the space for quite a while. So I'm really excited to dive into your backstory and some of the work that you guys do today. But Simon, maybe we could start with hearing a little bit about your personal story. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you found yourself working with XR technologies.
Yeah. So thank you for inviting me on the podcast. And so I have a bachelor in philosophy. I live in Copenhagen, where the company is based, in Denmark, and where I studied philosophy. And then I studied a master's in Florida, in Gainesville, in business. And then I moved to China to work in an international retail chain that I did for a number of years. And then I tried VR at a museum in New York. And I was just like, wow, this is such an amazing medium that can transport you to another place. And I saw this, The Clouds over Sidra, which I think some of the early XR pioneers will recognize, this documentary where you visit a Syrian refugee camp. And it's 360 video, and now with nowadays technology is really simple. But back then in this New York museum, I was just like, it was just such an intense experience, this feeling of transport, feeling of being present in a tent with a family eating together. And you didn't need all these like horror stories to feel emotionally connected. And it was just really, really interesting. So I just came back to Denmark, and I was like, who works with XR in Denmark? I made a list. Back then, 2015, there was not that many people. And I just started having coffee with everyone. Then I found my business partner and co-founder, Peter. He's an American guy living in Denmark and had been working on his own game in his outside of work. And we started the company together in 2015. then we started out publishing the first Danish XR game, Cityscape Repairman, on the first Samsung Oculus collaboration. I don't know if you remember the one where you slide in the phone in those like white or black kind of goggles. Much better than cardboard, but still pretty far from that. And then we started going into more B2B agency style work.
So there's a couple things before we get into the agency that I'm curious about. The first one is you mentioned networking with people in XR. This is a thing that a lot of people struggle with, like finding like-minded individuals, finding other people in your industry. And I think that our industry, it's really important, like this sense of community, like we're all trying to make this pie bigger. We're all trying to kind of grow this new thing. How do you find those people? Like, what was your process for getting connected?
Yeah, so, well, I think it's also, I've also been in the, visited some of the meetups in New York and other places. And I think, and being in Denmark, which is a country with 5.5 million, you get, XR is a small little, village type community. But once you go to Denmark, it's a really small. And once you go back to 2015, it's extremely small. So it was really, like, literally 30 people. And there was a small meetup, like Facebook group, and I just went. And I came with a lot of self-confidence and business background, feeling. Having been in successful in that kind of department, and then so it was more like, how do I bridge into someone who has more technology knowledge. And we didn't really know what we were starting or what we wanted to start. So it wasn't like, but we were just like on this mission to explore. So we started the company and got going and quickly switched more to from gaming to applications.
So that's another thing that I think is interesting is the start in the gaming world. I think that a lot of people still have this perception that VR is like gaming technology, right? Like a lot of people that have never used it or tried it for business. There's this select group of people that maybe on like the hard skills training side where it was adopted a little bit earlier, like these really big aerospace and like manufacturing companies, and like they tend to be a little bit earlier to adopt this stuff because it was really, really expensive to get involved in XR, and they had a bigger ROI that was more clear when it was so expensive. And now we're starting to see it branch out into like more ongoing use cases around HR, soft skills training, client onboarding, like all sorts of things, right? But a lot of people still think that VR is like a gaming technology. So maybe you could talk to me how you pivoted from starting with a game to moving into the enterprise world.
Yeah, I think we published Peter's game that he had developed, mostly 99% before starting the company, and then we re-released it in the company in April on the Oculus Rift. But I think from the very beginning, both his and my interest was solving problems with the medium. I have all the respect of the world for gaming industry, and I think that's super cool. But personally, I'm more interested in solving problems or making services better, or and I think so very quickly. Already while we were releasing the first game in December, we were talking about more like educational potential, training potential, art potential, all these other ways of using the medium. So it was for in many ways it was not really a pivot, I would say, but I think we had a very interesting approach that maybe 3 months after we started the company, we opened an arcade in the center of Copenhagen. I think many international articles deemed it the first VR arcade, because it was just after the Oculus Samsung collaboration, but it was before the release of the Rift or the Vive, all the other headsets. So and we just were on this mission to be like, how do we figure out how to use the technology to solve problems? Well, the best way is to make a shop with opening hours that everyone can understand how to use. If you call it a lab, people don't know if they're welcome or not. But like, it's it's an arcade or a shop. So people were just like, everyone that was interested in the medium, come in, try the technology, see if you get as excited as we are about this technology, and tell me how it could do anything for you and your work. And it was so interesting because we got a lot of media coverage, of course, but also just people started showing up. Like people were just like, well, I've read so much about VR. I tried it back in the 90s, and like that sort of thing. Or 10 minutes before we opened, there's an 82-year-old woman that's like, I really just have heard about this. I really want to try. Like I saw it in the news.
It's
But
probably
also,
that's probably my grandma going like, "Oh, my grandson works with this stuff. How does it work? What is
yes,
this?"
exactly. And so people just started coming in, like also people that were in the XR space or interested in the XR space. They just started coming in to try the technology, see the Rift and the Vive and all the early editions that we had, um, and some people came in with some really interesting insights that we didn't have about how it could be used in mental health, in marketing, in all these things, and that turned out to be like the first generations of projects for us.
That's a really tough business to run, by the way. I've talked to a few other folks that tried to start VR arcades well before, like Sandbox VR and Zero Latency, and the ones that are kind of popping up now. And it's a tough business. Like it's not unlike running a regular arcade, where like the margins aren't super high, and you're relying on foot traffic, and there's a lot of challenges. So I'm glad
Yeah,
that it
I
fostered
think
ideas and created connections for you to kind of bridge into something
yeah,
different.
I think we were also very much like from the very beginning that the arcade was not the business model. It was the marketing machine. That was the idea, was we want to have the right conversations with the right people in the right industries, and we want to explore, and we want to have, and the best place is to have an open platform for them to come and visit us and try the technology. And so we were never really looking at the arcade as a business model. Which I think a lot of almost everyone else who started arcades in that time, do not exist anymore. Mostly because of COVID, but also in general, it's a very difficult business model. But like the combination of commercial workshops with the arcade and then productions was kind of like creating this triangle synergy, also commercially.
So I think that's a really clever way to kind of attract first customers, and especially when you're building a new business, because one of the hardest things when you're getting started is figuring out where to focus. You've got this massive ocean of opportunity of different things you could work on and different customers you could pitch to. And it's really hard for first time founders or first sales reps in a company when they're just kind of getting started to like go find those first customers. And I think the model you created encouraged a lot of quick conversations and experimentation. Like when I show up to an in-person event like an AWE coming up here in a couple of weeks, I get to say my elevator pitch 100 times a day to 100 different people and pick up on their body language and the types of questions that they ask, and that pitch cuts words out and optimizes so quickly when you're in that in-person environment, just going through it over and over again. And I feel like that arcade and you almost describe it like a workshop, that'll get you a similar result. And this is a good segue because I was reading into your business model, and you have these workshops still. It seems like it's a really big part of the business. Like again, 1,500 plus that you've hosted over the years. And it seems like there's kind of three categories of these that you talk about: these kind of short demo sessions, like an intro to VR and AR, tailored workshops that are like more deep dives, maybe with a specific company, and then the schools and like the educators that you guys work with. Maybe you could talk us through a little bit about how those workshops have evolved and how you think about those in your business model.
Yeah, so workshops is important for us. It was really important in the beginning. In the beginning, maybe it was like maybe like a third of our business or something like that, and now it's maybe like more of a a small fraction, a much smaller fraction. But yeah, I think in general what we try to do is with workshops that's developed, like some schools were interested. We do some things for schools also because we think it's cool and we want to inspire a younger generation about this technology. The customized workshops are really the one that is really interesting, where we really get to be paid to explore new industries, and where we can also, now we've done so many workshops that we have such a big reference that we've every industry that comes in, we've done 10-15 workshops with that type of client before, so we have a lot of things to draw on. I think in general, when what you said about the pitches and how to perfect the pitches is also linked a little bit to the workshops and how we work. But I think in general, I think the biggest advantage of having the shop and doing all the workshops is that we don't try to come up with good ideas in industries we don't know. We're not trying to sit alone in a garage and trying to build something that can solve a big problem out in the world for some people that in industry that we don't know. So what is happening is that people are coming in through the door. We're inspiring them with technology, and together we are approximating if this technology has any kind of value that it could provide for them and their industry. And I think that's really like, so we don't really like a lot of other agencies. The way that they work is they sit and they try to come up with 5 good ideas for what can a bank do with XR, and then they go call that bank over and over again until they get a meeting, and then they pitch that bank their idea, and we don't really have that process at all. Well, some ideas where we're like, we've done this for this client, now we want to do it for these type of clients that are, we can do that. But mostly, I think most of the ideas come from, a real need from an expert in the field that has and us. And then, the real powerful thing in the workshops is when the client says, well, I really think that this could solve a huge problem for us. That's what we're going for. And I think it's a different, a little bit of a different approach than other agencies.
There was a quote from, I think this is on like your overview video. It was very front and center. It was easy to find. And I love the way you talk about the agency and kind of your guys' POV. And there's this quote that stuck with me, which was, build a bridge between your expertise and your customers. And the reason why that stood out to me is because I work in VR and I've been working in XR technology for a few years. A few years in this industry feels like a few decades. Like, people are so new to it that I feel like I hate the word expert, but I feel like I have a lot of expertise in this particular subject. But you know what I'm not an expert in for sure is how to manufacture cars, or chemical compounds that people are developing, or pharmaceuticals that pharma companies are making. Like, I don't know anything about that stuff. Very surface level, even if I do deep dives and a lot of research. But the customer, the person who might use VR for that business, well, dang, they might not know everything about VR, but they know a lot about pharmaceuticals or a lot about car manufacturing. And so being able to create that bridge between your expertise and your services and their expertise in their vertical or their industry, or even their division and their side of their business, that is where magic starts to happen with emerging technologies. Maybe you could, do you have any like tips or tricks or ideas on kind of how you bridge that gap with a customer?
Well, I think we try in general to be, very much like on the customer's perspective at all times. Like, we don't want to sell VR that doesn't solve a problem, because then the customers will not return. We want returning long customer relations, so we really want to actually solve problems, not pretend that we will solve problems. And I think that takes us a long way in some of those dialogues, because we get to a genuine collaborative mode quite quickly. And and we try to ask the question. The client don't need to ask the question, why VR? We ask the question way early, like trying to be like critical of why you should use VR for solving this problem, and like bringing that early on in the dialogue and being open about it. I think takes us into a more of an honest, more transparent relationship with the clients.
Do you have an example you could share of a client wanting to use VR immersive technologies, but it feeling to you like, I don't know, like this doesn't seem like VR might be the right fit for your problem?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things where, especially in the early days, where we would be like, it's a gimmick. This is, it's not solving a huge problem. This is a gimmick, and they would be like, yeah, but we have an internal event, and we would like this. Yeah, you may be right. It's not solving a big problem, but it's kind of showing us off as an innovative company. That's fine. We can build it for you, but we've at least told you face to face that it might this might not solve this big problem that you're kind of communicating here, and that's okay. I don't have people have a lot of different agendas, and solving problems is not always the agenda. Sometimes you want to go to a trade show and you want to get a lot of attention, and this is a way of getting a lot of attention. Maybe it's not, that's also a way of using the technology in a good way. I think especially in the early days, that was very much, there was a lot of those, my CEO, my boss really wants some new innovation, hand some new innovation to me, that I can show off, and that's fine. It's as long as it's honest and transparent, I think it's totally fine. But then we definitely also ended up walking away from, definitely a bunch of projects where we were self-critical about VR solving this problem.
I think the key is like you have to align the problem with what you're solving for, right? So like gimmicks do solve a problem. It's just they solve a very specific problem, which is I want a lot of attention, I want a lot of eyeballs, or I want to create a morale boost, and I really want to encourage employees to get really stoked about working here, right? I always joke that when you put a VR, and I've said this on the pod probably every episode, but when I watch people put VR on for the first time, there's like this childlike giggle and this smile, and companies spend millions of dollars on avocado toast and pizza parties to try and create that. So I do think there is a place for that gimmick of VR to serve a purpose, but it has to be a project where that is the purpose. If your purpose is I want to avoid employee churn by retaining better information and getting them up to speed and ramping them up faster, well, maybe you got to think about what that training program is, and if VR is a good tool for that type of training.
Yes.
Not just use it as a gimmick, right? So like there's a difference based on the use case.
Exactly. That's and I motivation or a better recruitment hype process. It's all solving problems. But I think especially I've had a hard time finding these really big use cases in banking. That's kind of been I've been quite skeptical about. There's been a lot of ideas about data visualization and minority report type workflows and stuff like that. I think I've definitely.
I go back and forth on it. I think that in banking, where I get excited is like corporate strategy, like when you're talking about change management and collaboration, or when you're talking about onboarding employees and showing them culture and communicating ideas virtually. There's a lot of really great use cases for that industry. The data visualization part, I geek out about, and I think it's really interesting. But that does still sit a little gimmicky to me too, where I'm like, why do you need to visualize it? Because when you're talking about taking apart a turbine for a jet engine, well, visualizing it could have an amazing ROI, where just seeing it in 3D could help you see things differently and save hundreds of thousands of dollars by catching mistakes or catching ideas. But by looking at a financial report in 3D, I'm not convinced that's more effective than a 2D graph. Like, I'm not 100% sure that 3D
Exactly.
is needed
No,
there.
I agree 100% with that. Like, and that's also the thing. I'm like with data visualizations or virtual meetings. I'm like, if you have a spatial data, like like temperature in a room, then VR would be amazing to visualize that in a building because it's a spatial data set and it doesn't really fit in a diagram too much. But if it's a diagram kind of data, or then the human mind is really good at reading that really
Well, it's really good
quickly.
at reading it, and we've also spent so much time creating charts and
Yes.
graphs in that format. Like, because so in our work at Arthur, like this is a big thing that we do is virtual collaboration, and a key to virtual collaboration, even in a 3D space, we even do it in person, is that you need to keep using the videos and PDFs and all of these things you've created. We're not just abandoning all of these mediums of communication that we've mastered and made very scalable to create. You still need that stuff,
Mm.
but there's just new things that you can layer on top of them and do a
Yeah.
little differently when you layer that 3D space in.
But I think
Um,
the spatial information, VR, everything spatial, VR can add something, or AR can add something. And when also with virtual meetings, during COVID, it was those whole crazy hype about virtual meetings, and every second VR article was about how virtual meetings is going to replace physical offices and conferences, and and I think it's like, again, if I'm if I'm building a new factory somewhere else, a virtual meeting would be super helpful. Being able to walk around the factory with the whole team and being like planning it out, that would make so much sense. But most virtual meetings, you want facial expressions, you want an icon, you want the real people, and that's VR would not be super good at that, even with
yeah,
even with some of the newer stuff or Apple personas or things like that. It's still not the. So it's just like finding out, okay, virtual meetings fit in this type of category meeting and this type, and in these types it doesn't fit. And I think that's just is a general thing that it's also I think VR in general, we're doing ourselves uh, like a disservice by sometimes overhyping things that we actually know is not there yet, or is not, has to be restricted a little bit. And I think it's just we're a little bit. It's like also the metaverse ride, a little bit like this unrestricted and like excitement about something that has a relevance but also doesn't have a relevance. Like it's somewhere in between, but we're overselling it, and then everyone gets disappointed afterwards, and then metaverse becomes this super negative word, where it was just perceived way too positively to begin with, in my mind. Um,
I think with the word metaverse, it also kind of got looped into the crypto hype a little bit, and
yes,
it
for
kind of got
sure.
tied into things that it wasn't.
And Meets has name change, and the reputation that Meets has, like, so there's a lot of other parts of it. But I also think in general it was just like a little bit oversold, just in
Yeah,
general.
well, and I agree with you. I think that when I meet with people and I talk to them about VR, because that's my job, right? Is to talk to people about their business problems and then figure out if VR is a solution for those business problems and where it can fit in. And if it is a good fit, help you structure that program and help you kind of build it. And I feel this kind of like, and I'm sure you feel this too, making a little bit of an assumption there, but it's like there's this weight of responsibility that if you're going to give someone their first experience in VR, or you're going to launch the first program that they get budget approval for VR, that has a really important ripple effect on the whole industry. Because if that's a good experience, well, they might do 10 more VR programs over the next few years, and not just with us, but with a variety of other vendors for other niche use cases. If they have a really bad experience, they might just avoid VR for the next decade. And every time it gets better, they're just going to say, I had that bad experience, until it gets so good that they have to change again and give it another try and revisit.
Oh yeah, all the cardboard Google Cardboard roller coaster rides really like got us a lot of first people trying VR, but then also really made everyone believe that VR is, nausea machine.
Well, people's expectations, right? Like, I interviewed this guy Nate Essen. I don't know if you know Nate, but he's one of my favorite people in the space. And he had this great anecdote about Beat Saber, where he's like, the reason why Beat Saber is such a successful VR game is because it matches all of your expectations. Like, you go in expecting to hold a lightsaber, you expect to cut something, and then it cuts in half. It's kind of to the rhythm of a certain sound. Like, there's a few little things, and then they make it a really dark space, so there's not a lot of distraction away from that one core thing. And it's a great example of kind of meeting someone's expectations from beginning to end. And I think when you meet expectations, you give a great experience and people are really happy, even if it's very simple. But if you set expectations to be like the holodeck from Star Trek, and then you give them a cell phone on your face, like, people are going to be pretty disappointed, right?
Yeah.
This is a kind of a I want to circle back into solving real problems, right? So we're talking a little bit of the we're being a little critical of when you aren't solving real problems. But I was looking into the history of the company, and it looked like you actually started another company before Khora, Heka.
Well, after Core, Heka's only was founded 2 years ago.
Oh, okay. But it's kind of seems like it's baked in a little bit into this series of products that you've made around the health and wellness space. This is very exciting to me. I've had a lot of conversations recently at VMed up in Beverly Hills, and I just met a guy down here in San Diego that's a neuroscientist that's exploring AR for dementia. I think that there's an amazing set of use cases around in your Comfort XR program, where it like helps kids kind of understand or distract them from needles and from needing as many drugs, and having these kind of simulations that kind of pull their brain away from the medical procedures they're going through. And then dealing with anxiety and exposure therapy and like this set of mental, I don't like the word diseases, but like these mental issues that people have to deal with. VR offers a really interesting solution, because we're kind of almost like brain hacking and kind of giving them this alternative way of going through it. And I was hoping you could maybe talk to me a little bit about how you got involved in that space, and kind of how you think about that set of products.
Yeah, I think that's also like one of my favorite areas, or what drives me the most, is some of the things we're doing in healthcare, and especially mental health. Well, I think it started for us again with a guy coming into the arcade, interested in how to use VR. He worked with long-term sick children at the main city hospital here, and then we did a project with him with the long-term sick children. Some of them were in isolation for months, or in semi-isolation for months, and we did tours for them. Today it doesn't sound super innovative, but back then, 2016, we had the GoPro camera rig thing. Stitching was a mess, and we had the Samsung headphones with the slide-in thing, and so that was kind of the first project. Now probably we've done probably like 120 projects in that area. Some of it with basically transporting people that are not able to transport themselves, like long-term sick children, isolation, dementia patients, older people. And then we moved into someone else came in who was one of the leading psychiatrists in Denmark. She came in and she was interested in using it for. So we started out with children who are in the high risk for developing schizophrenia. We moved on to doing one of the biggest trials to do with 360 video and social anxiety. I think that started in 2017. And now I think Heka is probably the spin-out company, is probably one of the things that I am the most excited about. It's also more advanced than some of the other things that we've done with. So what we do is we have a software that is a tool for psychologists or therapists to treat schizophrenia patients. So especially treatment-resistant schizophrenia patients. I don't know how much you know about schizophrenia, but to give you a brief, there's around 3 million schizophrenia patients in the U.S. So it's a fairly common mental disorder, and the really big problem is that around 1/3 are treatment resistant. That means that they're hearing, a lot of them are hearing evil voices in their mind, and basically they cannot be treated. The medication, super tough medication, has been given, but it's not making the voices go away. And so we have this new treatment that was originally developed in the UK that we are then bringing to VR, where in our software you can create an avatar that represent the voice that you're hearing, and then we can transform the therapist's voice so it sounds in real time like the voice that the patient is hearing, and then they can put on a VR headset and sit across the table from a voice that they have in their head, and the therapist can control what the voice would say, and they can have a conversation. And it's a little bit like taking something that's in your head and maybe intangible, and making it like very tangible as an avatar. And then over these 9 sessions of therapy, we see tremendous results. So we're doing the world's biggest VR avatar trial with 266 patients in Denmark. We have trials in Australia, South Africa, and the US, and Spain, Poland, Germany, and it's just really showing. I'm meeting with some of the patients that went through this. We're still waiting for the bigger statistical results, but I'm meeting with some patients that just had these tremendous life-changing experiences, like Vibeke, who heard voices for 27 years, tried everything there is to try in psychiatry, and then, now after 9 sessions of therapy, have been voices free for 3 years. Just for this type of group, in average in the Danish trial, people have been hearing voices for 15 years. So for this group that are treatment resistant, they don't really traditionally change that much, and that's why there's such an unmet need, and I think I'm really hopeful and excited about potentially bringing something out that is a tool for the many millions of people that don't really have any treatment options. So that's one of the projects, the spin out company that really motivates me, and where I really find impact, opportunity.
I mean, that's incredible. First of all, 1 million people in the U.S. I mean, that's almost 1% of the population. I mean, you mentioned in Denmark there's 3.5 million people. Like, that's a third of the population of Denmark that has this in just the U.S. That's a crazy number of people. If a third of them can't get treatment, that's hundreds of thousands of people that are affected. That's not small numbers, right? I'm guessing for the folks that are getting treated, it's mostly medication that they're taking. What are some of the alternatives that they've tried without VR?
Yeah, so medication, but the medication that is given to schizophrenia patients are so heavy that a lot of schizophrenia patients stop taking it, and that's why they get rehospitalized or self-medicate, so it's like the people that are helped by medication also have issues. It's I think but also of course some of the medications just gets the job done. I think that's so. And then of course you have classical cognitive behavioral therapy, conversational therapy, which I think for schizophrenia patient you need a lot of sessions, and it has not a very long-lasting impact. And then there's a lot of other interesting VR mental health companies out there, but not so much focused on this avatar therapy method, mostly on some of the lighter ends of the the exposure therapy, which we're also doing a lot of. We're also doing a lot of research projects in this field outside of both schizophrenia and outside of anxiety But I think the other VR companies that we're looking at mostly is doing this. But there's a couple of other companies that are doing some interesting things in this space, and I think over time VR and mental health is just like such a powerful area.
Totally.
It's also a totally difficult market to get into, but it's really a powerful problem that can be solved here.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of impact. Like when I went to VMed, I was talking to a lot of doctors about the use of VR in therapies and in medicine, and I hadn't really thought of it this way before, but it really is essentially brain hacking. It's like we're tricking the mind with vision and with auditory, like with audio. And if we can trick the mind with vision and with audio, then we have a lot of control over certain issues that people go through that we've never been able to do without drugs. Like that's been essentially the one way to do it. With exposure therapy with veterans, for example, with PTSD, like the way to do it was you would just say, close your eyes and talk through scenarios and try and get them to unblock these traumatic memories that they don't want to unblock. So that's part of why I think the two things that are showing progress in this area is like psychedelics with trying psilocybin mushrooms that can help open up parts of the brain, or VR and putting someone in a headset and kind of recreating those scenarios to kind of force them back into that situation. This is really interesting. So talk me through how you got involved in this, because I'm guessing you don't have much of a background in that space treating it. It sounds like someone might have come into an arcade or a workshop.
Yeah. That was very much like someone, like one of the leading researchers came in, tried VR, interested in using it in mental health. We were like, we can be your XR specialists, and you let us know how it can solve a problem for you. And then we did one project, 2 projects, 3 projects, and then we went from there.
Sorry to cut you off, but you mentioned this space is something that's really challenging, and I imagine an aspect of that is like, how do you fund a project like this? And like it's not like working with a company where there's already a team of people with a budget and resources that you're tapping into to launch a program. It's a totally different process, right? So how do you go about kind of getting the resources for something like this?
So we got we got a lot of research grants together with the therapists and our partners. So that's kind of how we got going. And I think in general, when you are trying to solve big problems in healthcare, I don't know how it is outside of outside of Europe, but at least in Europe, there's a fair amount of research grants to solve big societal problems, and those are the ones we tap into, and especially with the a lot of researchers here, they funded by a university or a region or like a public healthcare system, but they're also very used to like finding these research grants. So that's kind of how we got started.
It seems like a pretty massive undertaking. Like what kind of funding does it take to get a program like that off the ground? Is it in stages, almost like starting a company from scratch, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, so it is from like starting a company from scratch. I think in the beginning it was, we got with the schizophrenia. Though some of the earlier projects with the regional psychiatry here was smaller, but then we got an innovation fund grant solutions thing where we got around $2 million, where most of it is to finance the clinical trial, because that's the world's biggest VR avatar trial. But some of it was also to a fraction of it was to finance some of the development for the first version, first product. And then we managed to find some other research grants following that, and we got some investment, and we spin it out as a separate company, and now we're looking to raise a seed round and like kind of start getting commercial traction outside of research. It's kind of the next step for us. But I think it is a
What does that transition look like? So the research is essential, right? Because you need to be able to show that it works, and there's a lot of regulation, and there's a lot of like trying to remove bias so that you can really show this is truly
Yeah.
strong and powerful medicine, right? But when you talk about that move into the commercial world, is the customer for this essentially hospitals and therapists, or
Yeah.
and like you're essentially licensing this
Yeah.
program out to them?
The software license for hospitals and therapists. Yes, exactly.
Cool.
But of course, it's also a difficult market. That's also why it's going from research to is difficult, especially in a market where psychologists are not used to using technology that much. At least from the ones I've met, someone who's a therapist, they sit usually and they have conversations with patients, and that's kind of the natural way of working. So adding a technology element is not common. It's not like we're swapping out an existing technology. It's like bringing. So it's definitely going to be. We're up for an interesting next couple of years, but I think we're also really motivated because we're talking with so many therapists and researchers that are like every day they sit with patients that are not getting any better in this space, and they're like, well, if the results really are as good as you think they are, and we can have more patients like me because they come out and totally life-changing experiences with only 9 sessions of therapy, we need to do this. So I think the unmet need is really the driving force for getting this out in the hands of all the therapists that can do a big difference.
This is really powerful work. We'll only take a few more minutes here, but this is incredible. Like looking at your website, it's a very strong website too, by the way. I think it does a good job of telling a lot of the stories we've talked about today, from the workshops to these medical research projects to the really incredible enterprise work that you guys do as well. And it's comes across very top tier, very high quality, like your experience of you and your team shows. But wow, you work on a lot of projects. There's such a large scale of workshops and AR/VR activations. And then on top of that, this company you're talking about here, I mean, that's essentially like a 2 million Series A is how I think about that. That's like a whole endeavor in itself. How do you structure your team to support you in this type of stuff? And how do you kind of balance your time leading so many different projects?
Oh yes, you're at the heart of what's difficult here.
Yeah. It's a lot. Like you're doing a lot, and it's
Yeah,
a lot of different things that you have to
we're
code
doing a
switch.
lot of different things. We're doing we're trying to reuse things a lot, but it's difficult, of course, when you're jumping from an art project to a healthcare application to then commercial corporate production. So it's definitely. I think we are benefiting a lot from having working in different industries, because we then draw in these different skills. Also, the fact that we do VR, we do AR, we do 360 video, we do 360 rendered video, we do all the different subgroups in the XR space. Even sometimes we do like 3D animated stuff just for regular. So I think that allows us also to get familiar with a variety of pipelines, which allows us to lead the clients to the pipeline that makes sense for them. So we don't end up doing a 3D project that should have been a 360 video project, or the other way around. And I think we've learned a lot from all the different projects. The art projects push us in the aesthetic direction that we then can take to a corporate thing, and the corporate things makes us think about systems we can use in the healthcare space. But yes, it's very busy. We're trying to we have more or less 50 ongoing projects, more or less. We have weekly workshops with clients. We're a 30-person team, so there's also different hands to different people, but most people have multiple hats. At some point, more people need to go do a workshop, and then other times we don't do workshops, and we focus on delivering projects and getting them shipped off with installed a lot of headsets and to do that. So it's a very dynamic team, also with a lot of diverse backgrounds, people who are very excited about the technology and driven by the same things as me and Peter, and then we're trying to build systems of a systematic way of scoping with the client, setting expectations. That's kind of my big thing these days, is how to make that system.
So you mentioned there's a team of 30 people. It sounds like a lot of diverse skills and people kind of wear multiple hats. But if you were to break it down at a high level, is it like 10 like VR visual effects people and 10 producer people, or how would you break that down?
So we have so we have like 5 360 video film background people. We have 3 3D artists. This is roughly number 3D artists, like animation. Then we have some technical artists, 2 of those. 3 programmers. Mostly we use Unity. We have some project managers. And we have some administration, some biz dev, some people that are jumping between then the Heka team, the schizophrenia application, is kind of a separate company with a small team.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like it almost has to be like, that's so much like just hearing about the project, like that's a huge undertaking in itself. Like you almost need a dedicated group to that.
Yeah.
One other, and I'm guessing you also, just to confirm, because I don't want to make an assumption, like I'm guessing you have a little network of contractors or folks that help you too, if you ever need to like expand bandwidth.
Yeah, we do now, but historically we haven't done that. Historically we've been sole in-house team, but now we're adding a little bit of adding some external people to contract in. Things fluctuate as any other agency.
Totally. Yeah, that's where I was coming from with that, is like I used to work in the agency space, and one of the challenges is you're kind of always chasing the next deal, because like you're literally, it's like the cost of this project, and that project has a timeline, and this is why all these VCs love SaaS companies, is it's like super predictable ARR, MRR, recurring revenue. So you know exactly kind of what you have to work with, versus with agencies, it can fluctuate. If like you're one big project short one quarter, then the cost that you have to fund a team totally changes. So sometimes it can be nice to have that agility of kind of funding outside partners. I have one last question for you, and then we'll wrap up pretty soon. At the beginning of the call, before we started recording, you mentioned you're in an office space right now, and I think we were kind of saw you walking into the conference room, and you were sharing a little bit about the value of having that in-person space, that you feel more productive there. Maybe you could just give us like a little 2-minute breakdown of the value of an in-person space and like why you chose to go that route.
Yeah. So, well, I guess since we really started with the arcade, it was, and this inviting people in to get in and try, especially like 2015, 16, nobody had tried VR since the 90s, basically. So it was like getting the headset on people was just so key. And of course that meant we had a physical space, and that also made sense that we then also sat together. And, we used to sit like in the back of the arcade, so it was like, also this people were coming into the arcade, but it felt like a lab, or, a mix of a lab and a garage. And we're in the old meat packing district here in Copenhagen, which is like now like half meat industry and half tech. But like, it has like butcher tiles. So it's like an old butcher.
I just pictured like 1920s gangsters walking around the old meat district. Man, that's crazy.
Well, I don't know. I guess I think most people would consider it a little hip. But then so we were sitting in the back, and when people were coming in asking questions, the person who was out in the arcade would be like, "Simon, Peter, this guy has an idea." We're just bored. But now we have the upstairs, so the office is more upstairs. The downstairs is the arcade. But I think
so you're still running the arcade.
Yeah, we're still running it.
That's awesome.
open on Saturdays, Friday, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays.
I
We
got
have
to make it
you
out to
know,
Denmark. That's
yeah, we have
awesome.
like everything from companies, super serious companies coming in. I think last week I had 20 people flying from Germany from a German bank to eight-year-old birthday party coming in, just to try VR and play around, or teenagers on dates.
I love it. I love it. Simon, you're such an interesting person. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story and share some of the work that you guys are doing. I've really enjoyed this conversation. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If there's anything you want to plug, where can people find you? Anything you're working on that you want to share?
Well, I'm quite available on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. I think one of the things that I think a lot about, and I think is quite interesting, and it's a longer conversation, but is the long-term view of XR, smart glasses, and AI, personal assistant. I think that movie Her, but added with smart glasses, is just like, that's really where I think this technology is going over the next 10 years, and I'm just really interested in exploring that and what it means to be human with that type of technology. Like, imagine everything you look at is being analyzed by a personal AI that knows you, and what does it mean for kids to grow up in a world where there maybe is not that much friction, or how do we make sure that becomes a good thing? I think that's really something that I think a lot about, and I think with this AI wave combined with XR, it's extremely interesting.
Sounds like we need to do a part 2, Simon. We got to find some more time together, because I seriously think we could talk for 3-4 hours. There's a lot of things that I was wanting to ask, and there's that topic itself. I think we could go on for a long time, but I really appreciate the time, Simon. We'll definitely have you back on. We'll have to do another one.
Awesome.
I met a